so similar to this in terms of socioeconomic background and so on and so forth, with a 6-year-old that went missing. And that mother was so deceptive and difficult to speak with. And it turned out that she was that way because she was so ashamed and embarrassed and upset that because of her negligence, the child ended up dying. And she was trying to cover that. So it wasn't that she had hurt the child, but rather she felt sort of responsible for the fact that the child got hurt. And I sense that same feeling here. You know, did she get intoxicated and lose track? You know, what I don't like about this is the timeline. I've always said that there's a big gap, in my opinion, about a 3-hour gap that nobody's ever addressed. There's also a 5 o'clock Facebook. Has anybody seen that? The 5 o'clock Facebook, where she puts up a picture. It clearly isn't her house, but there's a picture she puts up at, I think, 5:03. There's no discussion about that unless somebody went into her Facebook account and put it up, and now it's gone. But law enforcement's going to be able to find all that. They're going to be able to look at what she did on her phone and on social media.
Well, another thing I've thought about is the dad, Don, gets on these YouTube shows in the middle of the night. He did another one last night, and he rambles at times. I mean, could that possibly be a sign that he doesn't have anything to hide, that he's just so willing to hop on these shows and kind of run his mouth like that?
Well, in my opinion, Brian, he is so familiar with the system. You know, he has run-ins with the law and convictions in, I believe, 4 states: Texas, Arkansas. He's been charged there, Utah. So this isn't his first rodeo with with a crime situation. And I find him to be very savvy when he's sober in terms of his choice of words, in terms of him manipulating the conversation, in terms of him taking on a persona that I don't believe is the real Don Wells, judging from all the other interviews and consensual monitoring conversations that I've heard. They don't line up. They're two different people.
Hey, Ansley, you're still there,
Yes, I am.
right?
I'm here.
I was wondering I know that, again, you've been to the house multiple times, but when you interviewed Candace, was it at the house?
It was at the house. It was right on their front. I don't know how far up you were able to go onto the property, but it was right in front of.
They wouldn't let us on even the driveway.
Okay.
We weren't allowed anywhere close.
Okay, yeah. So we've been up. I've been pretty much on the porch. I've been on the front, like pretty much in the front of the house with them before. But our interview was right outside their little porch area.
Did you get a chance to see inside at all? Because there's those, the video on YouTube where it's just, I mean, it's such a mess in there.
I did look inside. Most of my time was spent kind of at the doorway. We did not take our cameras inside at the time, but it was very similar to what you saw on YouTube from my point of view that day that I was, kind of up in the house.
Interesting. And tonight you there was a prayer vigil, right?
Yes, there was a prayer vigil in Kingsport. I went to that not too long after I saw you earlier today.
My sense from people that I've met here is that they just are so heartbroken about the case. I mean, what were people saying at the prayer vigil? I mean, did the Dr. Phil interview come up? Like, what was sort of the vibe?
The Dr. Phil interview definitely came up. I think that here it's been baffling. Like I said, obviously we have been, heartbroken here about what has happened and the lack of answers. But tonight at the prayer vigil, there was a lot of positive reaction around the Dr. Phil interview, as well as you being in town and, the, contiguous coverage, on our station as well. A lot of people are just hoping that this will continue to put her name and her face out there in hopes that someone will say something, someone who knows something will come forward. So thankfully, it was a lot of positive interactions. However, what I find interesting about this, like you mentioned with the YouTube situation earlier, is this prayer circle had folks from all over the globe on their live stream online. There were only about 5 people there in the room in Kingsport, but they had thousands of people from across the globe online. And you and I have talked before. I've been to most of these prayer circles. They're held weekly. This was the first one inside. Most of them are outside, so obviously the weather's getting a little bit colder here, so that's why there's a location change. But I've been to these prayer circles where there's been anywhere from 3 to 4 people up to 50, sometimes 20. So it's kind of interesting how the shift comes and goes in waves, and when it comes to interest in things like this.
And Jennifer, you're there, right?
Yes.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to ask you that I thought of was with the sheriff today, when we interviewed him, he said basically that they, I mean, essentially have made no progress over the last 5 months. Anything is still possible, and everyone involved is a person of interest. And I was sort of sitting there wondering, well, is he saying that to protect parts of the investigation, or do they literally know nothing? I mean, what do you think?
I think that that is just what he is supposed to say, so that's what he says. They're keeping it close to the vest, what's happening. I truly believe they're waiting for the DCS investigation to conclude. That's going to be a comprehensive report that could be followed up with charges against the parents for the conditions that those children lived in and endangering possibly those children in terms of medical care, in terms of possibly being around them when they were using drugs, possibly exposing them to dangerous individuals. All of that could be on the table for charges in the future against the Wells.
Could they be asking the sons while they're in protective care about what they know, since they happened to be
100%.
there that day?
I believe 100% they have been interviewed and probably will continue to be interviewed with very close care by specialists in that field, child psychologists, people who are trained in DCS to conduct those interviews, led by questions asked by law enforcement. In other words, that's what they'll be asking, but they'll do it in the way that's proper.
And what did you make, Jennifer, of, because I had heard sort of mixed things. Oh, she took the polygraph, it was inconclusive. Oh, I heard she passed it. So we just had a chance to actually ask the sheriff, and he said, yes, both Candace and Dawn did pass the polygraph. What do you make of that?
Well, polygraphs are interesting. The reason that they're not admissible in court is very simple. They are strictly an investigative tool. Sometimes we use it to see if people are just willing to take it, because typically a lot of guilty people don't want to take a lie detector test because they think they'll be found out. Other times people are guilty and they love to take lie detector tests because they think they can beat it. Lie detector tests, you only get to ask 1 to maybe 3 questions. The more questions that are asked of somebody, the worse the results are. So those questions are going to be very pointed. And in other words, did you harm your daughter Summer? Even simpler than that, did you harm Summer? And then they're going to look for respiration reaction, reactions in their body chemistry. I have seen people who have committed heinous crimes past that.
Really?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. A lot of people.
Because I was thinking, if you're guilty, wouldn't you be scared to take the polygraph? That's just what I was thinking.
Well, the people who pass polygraph tests are people who take them under the influence. It's really very difficult to conduct a polygraph in that circumstance. The other situation is habitual liars. People who are habitual liars can pass polygraph tests. And then there's other means of passing polygraph tests. I probably better not get into those. But people can pass them, and they're often passed. And I've seen people who are innocent fail polygraph tests because they're guilty about something else that's similar to the question asked.
Interesting.
So it's the polygraph. That's why it will never be considered, the suitable for courts. Now I tell you, I took a polygraph. I have to take them all the time with the bureau. But one time, just a friend of mine, I was doubting how good polygraphs are. So a friend of mine who was a polygrapher for about 25 years, he said, listen, I want you to write a number down between 1 and 20. He said, put it in your pocket. So I wrote a number down, stuffed in my pocket. And he polygraphed me, put me on the box. He said, is it 1? No. 2? No. We went through it. And it was like number 12 or something. And I said, no. Kept going. He goes, just give me the number 12 right now, Jennifer.
Wow.
So with me, because I'm not inebriated, I'm not a compulsive liar, I didn't use any of the other things that you can do to not be detected. Somebody like me and your normal person, it's very effective with. I don't know how effective it is with Dawn and Candace because I'm very well aware of their use of drugs and alcohol from their recordings and all they've said and so on.
Yeah, it is interesting having met with Don yesterday, spending some time with him. You know, he was very calm and polite. And when you do go back and look at the recordings on YouTube, even last night there was a recording of a YouTuber that he called into, and it's like almost like a different person. I mean, just as someone who's actually just met him, it's such a different tone. There's cussing.
Yeah, I listened to that recording, the latest one that he did right after your interview, and it's definitely a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type situation that develops when he is under the influence.
So Ansley, do you have any questions? Jennifer, I know I didn't really introduce Jennifer, but she's a former FBI agent, more than 2 decades with the FBI. Super cool woman, my friend, and also on News Nation quite a bit talking about this case and other cases, and she's really, really read up on Summer's case. Do you have anything do you have any questions for Jennifer?
Yeah, actually, I agree with what you just said when it comes to the two different personalities when it comes to Dawn. And I think another big question that a lot of folks here had is obviously we know that there are a lot of behavior analysis. We know that the behavior panel actually analyzed them on Dr. Phil. That was a big portion of his coverage. What does the potential drug and medication, etc., alcohol use have to do with how their body language could be perceived in those interviews and in those investigations?
Well, certainly, as I mentioned, the polygraph, to me, it gets negated if they were truly under the influence when those tests were conducted. That's in regard to polygraph. In regard to just the interviews conducted by the behavior panel, I watched those and he seems very sober, very composed, very calculating. I think when he is sober, he does a really good job of coming off, for the most part, truthful. But I see a lot of tells with him. When Brian was talking to him about these people and tried to go there, and he said, in fact, the words, I'm not going there, was that effect. Watch him look down. Watch him look down. Typically when people, and you can't read a lot into it, but you can definitely, all of us can see a complete change in demeanor. He nervous, standoffish, put his head down, didn't want to comment. And so I think when he's sober, he does a great job being interviewed. I don't know if I think the one with the detective from New York that does podcast. I think it's called The Interview Room or something.
Yes.
Yep.
When he talked with her and she took him through the house, I think that is the most sober I've seen Candace. In some of her other interviews, she appears to me to be very, and I'll call the word high, very high, under the influence. And a lot of those videos, when I hear in the background, another video that she's on that she seems sober is that last one made when they're with the milk cartons and she wants to get her hands when they're in a particular position. So, but when I saw her even on Dr. Phil, I don't think she was 100%, it just seemed like she was on some like a Valium or something. She just wasn't the same person when I compare it to the interview room, that detective that took her around. So that's the baseline for me.
Luis was just asking Jennifer if you notice anything with his eyes, like in our interview. Like he looks down at certain moments. I don't know if there was anything that stood out to you.
It did. And hi, Luis, by the way.
He likes to stay quiet on these things, but he's smiling.
So I did notice, I thought I caught his eye movement down and to the right. I don't like to see that because when I saw him the entire time, he's really thinking and recounting, he appears to kind of go up left, which is normal behavior, and because he's thinking, he's remembering. But when people are making things up, in my experience, they alter their eye movement from how they remember. And his altering is down and to the right. And I remember seeing that when you interviewed him. I'd have to go back to show you the specific spot. But I thought I noticed that. And again, I don't try to put too much into it all, but they're really a case for this because they've made such a great baseline with all these interviews they've done.
Yeah, and like you say, trying not to put too much into it. I was thinking the same thing, like just trying to come at this with an open mind. Look, I get it when you talk freely, sometimes you might slip up and say something that you didn't really mean. So I really, I wanted to be open-minded with this whole conversation with him,
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge on keeping an open mind, but it goes both ways. What really bothers me is that people get upset about, well, you can't look at their background or, it's unfair to judge them by their things they've done in the past. Well, he's not just doing them in the past, he's still doing them. He got a DUI. He had the children, let me think where the children were when that DUI came. It was, I think, around July 27th was his DUI. Ansley, do you remember?
Yeah, so the children were taken toward the end of July by CPS, the older boys, and the DUI was actually recent. And I was actually
November 1st.
Yes,
November 1st.
I was actually about to ask you a question about that as well. A lot of people here are wondering, why law enforcement or the judge continues to let him out on OR bonds, notice his own recognizance. He was let out that weekend, and then he was also rearrested in court the following Monday when he was there for his arraignment. They arrested him for violation of probation on his gun-related charge. I think he was charged with having a fire. He was under the influence and had a firearm back in 2020. And so I was just curious as to what your thoughts are on that, with the fact that they continually let him out. A lot of people are wondering why they don't just keep him in jail.
Yeah, it is a little bit mind-boggling, but at the same time not. When you see the different jurisdictions throughout our country, it's totally up to the judges, and each judge has his own litmus test and his own precedents that he's set. So he knows this is the case is under the microscope. So he's comparing his treatment of Dawn to the treatment he's given to other people who have done this same crime, and he is not going to veer from that. So say 20 other people have been in his court in the last month for driving under the influence, he's going to treat them similarly and Dawn similarly to them. So I just think he was trying to keep that consistent. It would be very interesting to look at the different cases that have hit his court to see if this is how he's treating all of them.
Absolutely. And another question too that a lot of people have here is they recently put a gag order on the CPS case involving the three older boys. And I know, most of us in this industry, even if you're not, in this industry, if you work with courts a lot, you understand that most juvenile cases are typically already, pretty tightly sealed. They're, closed, information is redacted. But the fact that they went around and already put a gag order on this, is that interesting to you at all?
Well, it was necessary because all of the publicity this case has received, the fact that John keeps seeking out podcasters and YouTube and every way he can get his voice out there, he seems to be doing. And because of that, the judge wanted to make it crystal clear that he doesn't want the circumstances surrounding those boys, out from the perspective of Dawn. And, the only thing that can happen is Don can be held in contempt of court. In my view, he's already talked about the boys. He actually whispered words to the effect of, or said words to the effect of, I had to say something to the boys about Summer on the side. And then he says, I can't believe the judge isn't even going to let me talk to the boys about their sister. And so he's already kind of talking about them out in the open, which isn't going to help his case ultimately.
And it's interesting, the sheriff said today to me, I asked, are the parents, are Don and Candace being cooperative? And he said, yeah, they've been cooperative. And he said what she did on Dr. Phil, where she broke down, that's happened before when they've tried to talk to her. But he said they now have, which I shared this with Ansley, he said they now have a lawyer. And so everything is now going through the lawyer in terms of questioning and that kind of thing, which I thought was interesting.
And that was not the case the last time I spoke with the sheriff on the record about everything. I'd say last time I saw the sheriff about a week ago, and that was not brought up at all. We didn't do an interview, but we talked about the case, and that was not brought up at all. So that must be fairly recent.
Yeah. So he said they're cooperating, but now there's a lawyer involved. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, I'm going to get off here just because we've had such a long day. But Ansley, it was great meeting you.
Same to you.
Thank you for all your help. I know you're covering this story every day. So
thank you. Same to you.
And Jennifer, you are always the best.
Thanks, Brian. Great being on here with you. Great job getting that nugget out of Dawn. That's a nugget.
Yeah, no, I was happy we got the interview just because, the sort of the behind the scenes of the day was like, Ansley knows how it goes some days. It's like you're getting it, you're not getting it, it's all over the place,
Absolutely.
So it all worked out. But thank you everybody for listening. This was my first Twitter space, so I'll figure out how to take all your questions and stuff next time. But everybody have a good night. Thanks again.
Thank you again, Brian.
Good night, all.
Night, guys.